Welcome, everyone. Mic is on. Thank you so much for coming. Absolutely delighted to have you all here to celebrate Opportunity Green's 5th birthday. Woo! The second thing is, unfortunately, President Robinson will have to leave a little bit early, but she'll be here for at least the most important part of the panel. So that is going to happen. We're going to direct some questions to her, I think, to start. But for those of you who don't know, Opportunity Green is an organization that works on sectors where emissions are not coming down yet. So things like aviation, shipping, heavy industry, agriculture, because we like to make life easy for ourselves. But we have 3 theories of change, which is how we tackle those sectors. So the first is about challenging those who don't do enough. And that's really a legal strategy. And I have an amazing kick-ass legal team who are bringing out all kinds of actions. And I think over the next 6 months, there's going to be even more, which I'm really, really excited about. Then we're also working to raise ambition. And what better way to do that than with the people who are on the front lines of climate change? So we work with climate vulnerable countries to support them in international forums where climate is a part. So in the International Maritime Organization, Food and Agriculture Organization, places like that. And then the third thing we do is we work with companies that we think are actually doing the right thing. And these are usually innovative, startup, front-runner, really exciting companies, but don't necessarily have a lot of policy experience. So we try to gather them together and put them in front of policymakers to inspire policymakers to go all the way to zero rather than another little incremental step. Which maybe brings me to why we're here. So having started Opportunity Green, I really wanted to also bring the positive on climate wherever we could. So it's kind of in the name, right? A bit, opportunity, some stuff there. We also have a positive climate stories blog, which is really popular every month, which is nice. But we really believe in celebrating the wins. And so tonight for our 5th birthday, we're celebrating with these fabulous climate icons around the themes of inspiration and resilience. And the inspiration bit is probably relatively obvious, right? It is every time we do have one of those amazing climate wins, big or small. But I think the resilience part is really important too. And for us, and especially working on those sectors where emissions aren't coming down yet, it quite often just means turning up again and again and again and pushing, even if it seems like you're not necessarily making headway. Because if you can continue to push for long enough, eventually you will see the little clinks of light coming through. And we are definitely starting to see that in some of the sectors we are working on, which is really exciting. So with that, I'm going to get into the panel. So I'm going to hand it over to Paul Dickinson, who I'm sure you all know, one of the founders of CDP and one of the hosts on Outrage and Optimism. He's also done a million other things, but I think those are 2 that stand out to me anyway. So, Paul.
Thank you so much, Aoife. Thank you. What a pleasure and an honor to be with such a wonderful panel and such a full house, which is great. And indeed, yes, I do a podcast with Tom Rivett-Carnac and Christiana Figueres, one of my many heroines. We were due to do one at Bath Abbey Thursday afternoon. Yeah, and it was sold out. And it's just been banned, cancelled because of the extreme heat. So here we are, living the experience. Let me please bring our panel into the room, starting with you, President Robinson, if I may, Mary. It was such a pleasure and honor. Mary. And as I come down, I'd like to start with you saying, really, what is it you're working on at the moment in climate change that's particularly inspiring you?
Well, before I do that, can I just say, first of all, happy birthday, Opportunity Green.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
And secondly, it's wonderful to be on this panel. Opportunity Green, founded by an Irish woman, Aoife. Michaela, we have worked together. You're a wonderful young climate activist, brilliant. You are my star of the show, Tessa, because you were my first guest on my podcast, Mothers of Invention, some time ago, where we talked about climate with some humor. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, I do.
It's not that long ago.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was before COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. And So even though I have to leave early, I'm very happy to be here. I'm in London Climate Action Week. I can't say with 4 hats, because nobody wears 4 hats. I don't like wearing hats anyway. 4 patches on a hat I'm not going to wear. I'm here as an elder. So yesterday I was part of the ethical global stocktake with the Brazilians, remembering how we brought that together before Belém, but we're going to continue in the stocktake to bring this ethical global stocktake, talking about human rights, talking about gender equality, inclusiveness, justice, wonderful. And we saw a film that was done of the 6 regional meetings that have taken place, and many, many other local communities that did it. I'm here for Project Dandelion. I'm co-founder of a women-led, but not women only, with very supportive men. By the way, we're all wearing, and you should have your, and I will make sure before I leave, Paul, that you get your dandelion, because supportive men are very important. This is a women-led movement on climate justice. We started with women who are at the table, who get to COPs, who are there, and who lead organizations at the global level. We brought them together to link with and be a real voice for what's happening on the ground, which we're probably going to talk about quite a bit on this panel, resilience. The infrastructure of indigenous women, young women, grassroots women, young entrepreneurs, communities holding their together to make that more visible and frankly more funded, because that is what is making the huge difference in our world. It is very big when you measure it across countries and across communities. It's the infrastructure holding communities together with these awful climate shocks that are hitting communities. And so, and then, I can't remember now, but anyway, yes. My third hat is I am a guardian of the planetary boundaries, which Christiana Figueres is also. We were brought in because the science, when you look at the 9 planetary boundaries, is very grim. It's very serious. We're in breach of 7 of those 9 planetary boundaries, which are basically the ecosystems that hold the world together. In breach of 7 of them, and they're interconnected in a way we don't understand. It's this wonderful nature that, you know, has so many links that we're beginning to thread through and try to understand. And the guardians are there to say, yes, it's a very serious situation, but it's also political. We can do things. And that's also what we probably talk about in this panel. Shift the money. Shift from what's harming us. What is it? How many? 1.6 trillion or something on fossil fuel, bad land management. You know, if we can incentivize the good things. And then the last hat is a business hat, which I've been involved in as an elder from the beginning, the B team of business leaders. And I remember, and it's a memory for you, Paul, in January 2015, I was with the B team of business leaders. They had just listened to Johan Rockström and his 9 planetary boundaries, and they were kind of affected by it. And they said, we're going to have to give leadership. We are going to commit to what they called at the time the long-term goal before Paris. This is what was called the long-term goal. We are committing to be 0 carbon emissions by 2050. And when I told Christiana Figueres about that, she cried. She actually cried. And she said, this is just so important. And then, you know, in Paris, we got that goal of staying below it. But it was very much the language of the long-term goal. 2050 was an awful long time away. It's getting closer. And we're still not on course for it. Sorry, I've given you a long answer to the question, but basically, I think, you know, it's so important that we have opportunities like Opportunity Green to see young people like you. Everybody's young to me, but you're very young as an audience, and a good gender dimension, and everything's, and you're having a party tonight, but also you're very serious, and you're rightly very serious about the biggest problem, which is reducing the emissions and doing everything you can on the hard stuff, the hard areas, and I really admire that.
Mary, if I could just say that when you describe what you do, you also seem to say how we do. Just to bring in Michaela next. Michaela Loach, we know of you as a TV commentator, as an author, but can you just tell us what your kind of primary work is at the moment, and to introduce yourself to the audience, those who may not know you?
No, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela, and I wasn't actually going to say it, but just in case you see my face looking a bit weird, I just had surgery 2 weeks ago, and this is my first day out of home properly. So I'm in a bit of pain because these trousers are tighter than I expected. So it's not anything to do with what anyone's saying, although I have been a bit famous for my facial expressions when Piers Morgan is speaking. But that's not what's happening here. It's from physical pain. But I'm a climate communicator, I guess, climate justice organizer, grassroots organizer, an author of 2 books, It's Not That Radical, and Climate is Just the Start. They're both books on climate justice. But more recently, in the last few years, my focus has been on a new organisation called Awetu, which I have started up with my wonderful friend and comrade Jess Malley. And we do political education for young Black people on the intersection of climate justice and Black liberation. And we run an 8-week program every year in person. And we're now expanding as we've finally got funding properly to the north of England, and going to be doing more incubators up there as well, because the climate issue is one that impacts the Black community disproportionately more than other communities, and yet our community has been severely left behind and excluded. I can see there are other Black people in this room who probably experience a lot of racism within the climate space and exclusion. And that means that in many ways our community get left behind and then aren't included in the solutions that are being chosen. And that will mean that the future that we have isn't going to be as good as it can be, because when the most marginalised people are left out of the decision making, it just makes the world worse for all of us. And actually what we have is an opportunity with climate justice to actually completely transform the world around us and make it better and safer and freer. And I think we need to make sure that we're really taking that opportunity. And my theory of change is that grassroots organising is what pushes that forward. And so we're trying to equip the next generation of organisers and climate leaders to be young Black people who are going to transform our world together, collectively, not as individuals. And so that's what I've been focusing on a lot more recently. That's why I don't do TV anymore, because I don't want to argue with people. I just want to build stuff instead.
Thank you, Michaela. The union makes the force. Tessa Khan, Executive Director of Uplift. Can you just similarly share with the room where and what you are?
Yeah, certainly. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all, and delighted to be part of this celebration of Opportunity Green. So I am a human rights and climate change lawyer and campaigner, and I currently run an organisation that I set up about 5 years ago called Uplift, which is basically focused on fighting oil and gas expansion in the UK and in ensuring that we have what's commonly referred to as a just transition. So basically ensuring that the people who work in the oil and gas sector, their families, their communities who have ties to that industry are supported into alternative livelihoods, so that we aren't sacrificing communities as we make this essential transition happen at pace. It's a huge privilege to wake up every day and fight the oil and gas industry. And I think we're in a moment when it's clear, not just as we've known for decades, that fossil fuels are what is overwhelmingly responsible for driving the climate crisis, but that oil and gas are also driving conflict, geopolitical instability, as they have for decades, of course. Also energy unaffordability, national security crises, and that there is every reason for us to move. Even if climate change wasn't a problem, there would be every reason for us to accelerate our move away from oil, gas and coal within our energy system, just to make sure that people have better lives, we have more resilient societies, we have jobs for the long term, we have equal societies as well. And I do this work because as I said, I started as a human rights lawyer, and that was one of the first ways in which I have been basically mimicking Mary Robinson's career path for the last couple of decades. But, I think this is a climate crisis is a matter of social justice and economic justice, and that could not be clearer than it is at this moment.
Climate and war. We did just comment before when the ICJ went to the United Nations for a vote, and there were 8 countries that voted against. 4 of them were the United States, Israel, Iran, and Russia. So there's something nexus here about climate and what you might call military challenges. I mean, I'm here to support a conversation amongst all of us, but I'm going to go back to you, if I may, at the start, Mary, to sort of ask, if there was a particular moment, because we want to sort of think a bit personally this evening, if we can, or look at the human side. Was there a particular moment when climate became particularly important to you?
Well, the interesting thing, and I don't mind admitting this, I came very late to understanding the full impact of the Climate and Nature Conference. I was President of Ireland from 1990 to 1997. I didn't make a single speech on climate. I spoke about the environment. I spoke with a lot of care about the environment, but climate wasn't an issue. It was for academics, for scientists, but it hadn't penetrated the mainstream. And then I became UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and then I did understand how severe and important the climate crisis had become, but there was another part of the UN dealing with it. And I didn't relate it to my portfolio of human rights, gender equality, rights of indigenous peoples, rights of people with disabilities, because it was such a heavy lift, and we were in a silo of a very heavy human rights lift, and that was enough for a small office. We were working very hard on that. And it was actually after I finished my term in 2003, and beginning in 2003, I formed a small NGO called Realizing Rights to work on economic and social rights, the neglected rights in African countries, especially in Ghana and Liberia. And I was also honorary president of Oxfam, and they were wheeling me out. And everywhere I went at that time, people would say to me, things are so different, we can't understand. Women would say to me, is God punishing us? This is outside our experience. The rainy seasons aren't coming. We have long periods of drought and then flash flooding. And it almost did my head in, because I was either in New York, where I was working from, or in Ireland, and we still weren't talking about this. But in African countries, they were already totally affected. So because I came from the lens of human rights, I could only talk about climate justice, not climate change, but climate justice, the injustice, that it affects the poorest countries, poorest communities, small island states, indigenous peoples first and most severely, and has been doing for a long time. And they've been trying to cope with it. And they're not responsible. And then there's the gender dimension, and the intergenerational dimension, and then what we're doing to nature, etc. So, I'm a slow learner maybe, but anyway, I finally came to climate very strongly and with a whole sense, this is my human rights now. This is the human rights issue of our time.
Well, you'll get another question, which is, of all of those things that you've done, that you've just touched upon, is there something that stands out, or particularly perhaps we're interested in those stories that the joyous success, getting Christiana to cry. What comes to you at this moment that has been a sort of very meaningful breakthrough that you've experienced or led?
Well, let me go back to a memory which I would share with Christiana Figueres very much, the Paris Agreement. I remember very well, because I was the special envoy of the UN Secretary General in 2014, 2015. We arrived in Paris. There was no agreement. The mood was very low. There had been the bombing, the awful attacks in Paris, but the heads of state were coming. That was at least something. The whole atmosphere was very, very tense. And we did not have agreement on a goal. And I remember the Vulnerable Forum, the indigenous peoples, the marching in the street, 1.5 to stay alive, 1.5 to stay alive. And then Tony de Brum, the foreign minister of the Marshall Islands, tiny atolls in the Pacific, had a charisma that made him a leader, and he was leading the High Ambition Coalition with one goal: to get 1.5 into the text. Hard fight. It didn't happen to break through until the second week. Until the second week of Paris, there was not a full agreement about this. When it happened, the emotion was enormous that we got this goal of staying well below 2 degrees and working for 1.5 degrees. That's essentially the goal. It was so important at the time. Now it has been converted into something really different by the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, which has really strengthened, because at the time this was a political decision, but they have made it something: you mustn't cause harm. Very simple, not causing harm. And this is really, really important. So somehow, in the opinion, which I was so happy about, and starting again in the Pacific, in Vanuatu, in a law school, these students, how do you get an opinion of the ICJ, a resolution of the General Assembly? Okay, we'll work on that. Poof, and it all happened. I'm saying this to this young audience: believe in your power, believe in what you can do. You can actually change things. It's going to be people power. It's going to be how we will bottom up in communities, insist. Polling says the majority of people in the world want climate action. Our voice needs to be stronger. So everything you're doing in Opportunity Green, everything Michaela's doing, everything, all of it matters hugely. And if you don't mind, can I run away now?
Not quite.
All right.
A tiny bit longer.
All right.
Tiny. Just
One more easy question.
only one. Really, it's what would you like people? I mean, you've said it a little bit, I suppose.
Yeah.
When things feel slow or difficult,
Yeah.
how do you build resilience, and what would you like people to sort of take?
I like that question. Oh, I like that question. This is my real gospel. Listen up. I'm a former High Commissioner for Human Rights. I was responsible for the 50th anniversary in 1998 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And you know something? And Aoife will appreciate this particularly. I got the Guinness Book of Records for the most published document in the world that year. Woo! Woo-hoo! But there are 30 articles in the Universal Declaration, and most of them are about individual rights, and they are very important. The rights of the child, of women, of LGBTI, really, really important. But there's an article that the human rights community, I think we've neglected, and it has now become so important. It's the second last article, Article 29. And I can give you, because I don't know all the 30 articles by heart, but I know the first one and I know this one by heart. And I'll give it to you exactly as it is, because it's not gender sensitive. And then I'll give it to you my way. Okay. Everyone has duties to the community, in which alone the free and full expression of his personality is possible. That was at a time when he also included she. Forget that. I'll give it to you the right way. Everyone has duties to the community, in which alone the free and full expression of their personality is possible. So you have to know that you have a duty to community, that you should do something about it. And when you do, lo and behold, you yourself reach the full, and don't we all know that that's true? How many of us say when we work with community, but I get far more back than I give? How many people know that? If you work with community, if you work with others, if you do for others, you yourself, you don't know what it is, you're breathing a different air somehow. It's the full expression of your personality. That is human rights. And why is that so important now? Not just for climate. It's so important now because we have so much misinformation, disinformation, false images. I'm on Facebook. It's not me, but there's an image of me on Facebook selling bonds, flips up and every now and again, and it says, I'm your former president, you can trust me. It's not me. It's not even quite my voice, but it would fool people. And it drives me crazy. But look what they did at the Pope. Look what they're doing to everybody. What is truth? Truth is significantly our relationship with the other. And it's not just, human rights. It's also Ubuntu in Southern Africa. It's Mechel in Ireland, a similar concept. It's, so ground in community, build from community, and we will address all this lies and everything else that's so deadly in our world today. And, the fact that it's grounded in human rights pleases me very much, because that means, we can really, walk tall and, sort of know that localizing more, we have a more globalized community, localize in more food sovereignty, localize in so many different ways, and localize actions, in countries, as you're doing in Opportunity Green, and Tessa's doing. Tessa's my daughter's name, so I wouldn't forget your name. Just connect the local and the global, but the local is going to be more and more important. I am because you are, Ubuntu, the relationship with the other, working in community, building the communities at the developing country level that are so important but are not visible enough at the moment, understanding they're the infrastructure of what's changing in our world. And we have to fund them properly because they're the ones making the real difference. Can I go now? Okay. Oh, hang on.
No, I'll take it off you. Oh, it's my badge for me.
Yep.
Thank you, Go. What a treat. This is, I feel like I think it's the only award I've ever actually received. So thank you very much indeed, Mary. I appreciate that.
Well, I couldn't give it to a better man.
Well, you're very kind.
With that wonderful podcast that you do with Christiana and all the other work you do, and I can't get it into your shirt.
That's my problem. You're not going to miss your dinner because of difficulties with my
I tell
shirt.
you what,
Yeah?
I'll put it here.
There we go.
There we are.
Thank you very much, Mary. Greatly appreciated. This is not what I expected this evening. Nor did you, actually. Oops. We might have to surrender, Mary. I'm going to take responsibility for this.
All right.
Trust me.
I give up.
It's there. It's there.
The thought is
Thank
there.
you so much. Now,
Okay, sorry about
be
that.
careful because we have a job to get into. Bravo! Okay, well, what a joy to have the opportunity to share those insights. Can we roll it again? So maybe what brought you or took you into climate change? Someone will move.
I mean, so my parents are raging lefties, so I grew up always knowing I was going to do something, and actually, with the inspiration of my hero, very much wanted to be a human rights lawyer, and so went into a big corporate law firm to get qualified in Ireland, because you have to work to get qualified, and it's the only way to get paid while you get qualified is to go into a corporate law firm. And Ireland is small enough that each of the political parties basically has its preferred law firm, and the one I was in was the one where the government that was in power at the time was sending all of its work. Luckily, though, the Greens were a small part of that coalition. And I mean, this was from 2008 onwards. So, I mean, Ireland had a lot of issues in 2008. Let's just put it that way. But the Greens were forcing through all of these wind deals. And I was, photocopying things to do with them because I was a very junior lawyer. But what I realized then was climate change is human rights plus science, and was this just huge catastrophe coming down the road. And so ever since then, I mean, it's very much that human rights lens. And I thought that has got to be the thing that I'm going to work on. And hopefully, hopefully it won't be a job for life, but we'll see.
I think when I was growing up, maybe like some other people in the audience, I saw the climate movement or environmentalism as like an issue for middle-class white people who didn't have other problems in their lives. And I remember like really being quite resistant to it because I felt like, why were people not like working on like police brutality in this country, or like people are being killed by the police, like people are like black people are being mass incarcerated, or also working class people being mass incarcerated, but particularly black people are being mass incarcerated, not just in this country but across the world. And you know, poverty, the legacies of colonialism, this felt so much more like urgent to me. And I think I actually felt quite frustrated in the face of the environmental movement, and so I had this like quite resistance to it. And instead when I was a teenager, I was doing more like migrant justice organising work. I grew up in like a tiny village in the countryside where like no one was an organiser and people were not lefty at all. It was like Tory havens. So I wasn't surrounded by like activisty people, but I had like a very strong sense of justice myself, and my parents really raised me with this understanding that my freedom was made possible because of like very radical freedom fighters in the past, such as Nanny of the Maroons, who, you know, like she took like violent rebellion against her enslavers, and that's how in many ways slavery ended. It wasn't just because of like nice white people writing letters. It was actually because people made slavery like not viable, financially viable as a industry, through slave revolts, through many different means as well. And so I think I was raised with this understanding that change has been really fought for, but then at school it was this whole like, oh, it's change has been fought for in the past, we live in this golden age of freedom, we should be so happy, everything's good. But then it was actually when I saw a photograph of Alan Kurdi, who many might remember this. He was 3 years old and his body washed up on a beach in Greece, as his family were, you know, wanting just to take a journey for safety and dignity, as anyone should be able to. And it's because of like Europe's violent borders that he didn't make that journey. And I was, he was 2.5 years old actually, and I was 2.5 years old when my parents moved from Jamaica to the UK, and I felt this, and obviously I was able to do it like safely, legally and easily, just simply because the privilege of my father is British. And that same privilege wasn't offered to Alan and his family. And I think when I saw that photograph, I felt this kind of deep like humanity between the two of us, and how different our lives were just based on very arbitrary things, and I wanted to do something about it. So I went to Calais, and it's actually good to get emotional about these things, I think, but it's feeling stuck in my throat now, so I'm sorry that my voice is changing. I went to Calais and I just wanted to do something with my mum, and we were chopping wood and making food for people who are on the move and just wanting a safer life. And a lot of the people that I ended up meeting there who were people on the move, you know, trying to find safety or dignity, they had been forced to leave their homes because of the climate crisis, because of food insecurity, because of conflicts that have been exacerbated because of food insecurity, because of droughts and other things like that. And it made me recognize this connection between these two things that I saw as actually quite separate, of this like racial justice and very human rights side of it, and the environmental side of things. And then when I got back to the UK and went to university to study medicine, because again, at school they said if you care about changing the world, become a doctor. So, and then at med school I realized that there are many other ways that you can do that, and medicine has its own issues. And there I came at universities where I was exposed to climate justice through my global health policy degree, but also through organising with Extinction Rebellion Scotland. And then when I returned back to Jamaica, I went to a beach that we'd been to many times growing up and hadn't been for a while, and that beach had been almost completely swallowed by rising sea levels and successive hurricanes. And that's only 10 minutes from my grandma's home. And it's suddenly, I think the urgency and the very proximity of the climate crisis to people that I loved felt very present. And that's when I came back to the UK and was very much like, this is what I will dedicate my life to. And I've actually left medicine in part because of this, because I think this crisis deserves a huge amount of attention. And I found that my role is perhaps not as, I wanted to be a doctor doing search and rescue missions was my plan, and then life had a different plan, it seemed. But yeah, I think that it's important for many communities that we talk about climate not just as this emissions future, a bit abstract thing, but as this, like, it's impacting our communities today, like there's, you know, violence is a source of extraction across communities today, and I think that's what will bring actually more people in, not only because they'll see that connection, but also because if you show them that to tackle it through climate justice, we have the opportunity to actually tackle things like police brutality, actually tackle systemic racism, like actually create, like actually tackle like, you know, poverty and these things as well, then we can actually offer like a better alternative, rather than, at least when I was growing up, I remember it was this very much like doomism thing of like, we have to just stop the apocalypse, and actually what can we offer as well as what could we have instead, and how amazing could that be? And I think that'll get more people on board as well. It's what got me on board, so yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing also reference to refugees, because it's a bit complicated to measure, but I think the International Rescue Organization talk about people in refugee camps spending an average of about 10 years in refugee camps. It's kind of another world that, you know, so little is discussed.
Yeah, I think my sort of trajectory has elements of both what Aoife and Michaela have outlined. I also definitely did not ever identify as a conservationist or an environmentalist. I am not someone who grew up with a love, or really, in a way, kind of much exposure to nature in a recreational sense, like it was around, but I wasn't like into it. That's changed largely because my colleagues have an entire Slack channel dedicated to birds, and so I just get a lot of pro-bird content in my day-to-day at the moment. But I mean, more seriously, my family is from Bangladesh. It's still where most of my family is, and I moved to Australia when I was pretty young, but we still spent you know, summers in Bangladesh with my family, and it was just very obvious to me from an early age that, you know, there was a huge difference between the prospects and life chances and opportunities that were available to people, depending on whether, through no fault of their own, you know, no difference in their aspirations or their talents or their determination, you know, you just ended up in either Bangladesh or Australia. And I was lucky that I had somehow ended up in Australia, and that registered at a very young age for me as being fundamentally pretty unfair and as a problem that probably needed to be cracked in some way. And so that kind of set me on my path as a human rights lawyer and campaigner, just trying to investigate really the sort of structural roots of that deep inequality. And so that, you know, I sort of did that for a while. And then in 2013, I was living and working in northern Thailand, working for a regional human rights network. And there was a very powerful, I think the first super typhoon that hit the Philippines, Typhoon Haiyan, which killed about 6,000 people, and lots of my colleagues were Filipino, and I'd been spending time there. And it was, I think, the kind of weather event that really took people by, you know, took professionals by surprise because of its ferocity, and it started, I think, to crystallize some of the science that we now know is very robust around the way that climate change drives the frequency and intensity of these kinds of extreme weather events. And at the same time, you know, spending time in Bangladesh, the kind of course, that's a country, it's one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. It is also constantly hit by flooding and typhoons, and also, you know, the sort of menacing encroachment of sea level rise on coastal communities. That means that millions of people are migrating internally within Bangladesh every year because it is no longer viable for them to live where their ancestors and families have been. So, you know, the pieces just kind of started to fall into place for me that, hang on a second, if you care about human rights and equality, then this seems to be like the biggest systemic threat to all of those things. And it also threatens to undo, to the extent that we have had, you know, progress. And I was fighting with grassroots organizations across Asia and the Pacific for, to secure economic and socially just outcomes. All of that was under threat. You know, there was just the prospect of this crisis wiping all of that out, and, you know, decades of progress. So it just became pretty clear to me that this should be the thing that I do all the time. So that was what set me on the path.
Those are inspiring stories. I'll share one, which is that in '97, I met a scientist who said the Gulf Stream is going to shut down. It's going to be fairly light blue sky tonight after 10 p.m. And that's because we're on the same latitude as Halifax, Nova Scotia. So if you think of all the snow they get in New York, who are on the same latitude as Rome, it's kind of scary. So if we think about things, I mean, Mary gave a great answer, the Paris Agreement, but what are successes that we should celebrate or you think that should kind of offer inspiration to any of you?
I can talk about what I think has been, what I've found a success within my work, not to say, there's obviously wider successes in the world, but so I've been on a bit of a journey with organising and everything else. And as I said a bit before, part of that journey took me to starting up Owetu. And the part of the reason of that is because I think before recently, I have been, I would say actually in some ways, like often more involved with like the mushroom part of it than the mycelium part of it, in the sense of I've been able to be part of like some very visible wins, like for example, the Stop Cambo campaign with Uplift and many other organizations. And, I've been able to like challenge billionaires like Bill Gates at his events, or been able to challenge Shell's board and CEO at their AGMs on behalf of other communities. And I think sometimes the successes or the mushroom can get attributed to those who are visible in that moment, when actually like the ability for the mushroom to fruit is because of the mycelium. So it's because of the like underground work that's been going on for so much longer that we don't see, that won't have succeeded, that will have died, that will have nourished for other like mycelial networks to continue growing and growing. And so that like the visible thing is possible, and that visible shift's possible, and then other people see that mushroom and it sends off spores, and that means that other mycelial networks are planted and start growing. Whereas I think that whilst I'm grateful that I've got to be part of a lot of the mushrooms, what is really important is the mycelium, because that's what's going to allow all these other like fungal networks to grow everywhere. And so in starting Owetu, it was like, how do we like resource and nourish those mycelial networks? And how do we make more of those networks possible and stronger? And so that came from, with Shell's AGM, I was working in solidarity with communities in the Niger Delta, which is one of the most polluted places in the world because of Shell's violence and extraction there. The life expectancy is around 40 years of age in the Niger Delta, which like should be like so beyond shocking and awful, and it is beyond shocking and awful, but I think that we can normalize that, I think, too much, even in climate spaces sometimes. And that's because of Shell's extraction of oil and gas there that is really linked to like British colonialism, because that's how they gained access to that area, was when like the British fleets wanted to change their source of their ships from coal to oil. They were like, we need somewhere for oil, so let's go and like buy the entire country of Nigeria to give to a then British company Shell. And that's the legacy that's left us with what Shell is in today. And so, yeah, that challenge there was in solidarity with these communities. But then it's like, how do we build stronger connections and stronger mycelial networks so that we can, shut down Shell completely one day, and beyond that, and end extractivism one day. That's the dream. And with Owetu now, what's been really wonderful is that every year we have Ken Henshaw, who's one of the members of We the People Nigeria. He comes via Zoom from the Niger Delta, speaks to our cohort every year. And this year the last year, it was very beautiful to see that 6 of our young people have actually now started their own organising group called Niger Delta Solidarity UK. And they are organising like Black diaspora in solidarity with the Niger Delta in particular, against Shell and their extractivism and challenging their social licence. And that, I think, for me has felt very meaningful, because I feel like I've been able to, nourish a new mycelial network that will go off and hopefully grow a mushroom one day, that one day we will be able to see, and then it will grow more mushrooms. And yeah, sorry, my brain works in analogies, as you might notice. And that's something that really helps me going, is knowing also that even if we're not seeing the win right now, like the networks are being built, the networks are being nourished, and like the mushroom will come one day as long as we like continue going.
My turn to try and not cry. Going back to Anita Roddick trying to defend Ken Saro-Wiwa, who ultimately was executed by the government, but she was warned if she put adverts in every body shop around the world, it could bring the company down. And she said, rather that than some fucking share price. And they still killed him, but it's a sort of story about the power of organization. So here for the mycelium. What other stories make you want to celebrate?
Yeah, well, I mean, I could definitely say one from the early days of OG, which maybe builds on some of those themes, and the kind of OGers will remember this. But we have worked very hard on shipping since kind of day one. And one of the things the shipping industry is doing is they're saying, don't worry, we won't use oil. We're going to use this wonderful fuel over here called gas. And it's a transition. And you're like, what are we transitioning to exactly? But anyway, fine. So we're very clear from day one, taking down gas in shipping was definitely a big thing. And so one of the things the shipping companies were doing, where they're selling these cruises, saying it runs on gas, and so it's this green cruise, and you don't need to feel guilty about this cruise because it's all on this wonderful gas. And so, exactly, it's natural. What could be wrong about it?
Those companies have tried to like gift me a cruise.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh my God, amazing.
Like, no.
Yeah.
There's no way.
I mean, there's so many things wrong with cruising. But anyway, and so we wrote a report basically just saying, look, you're greenwashing and here's the legislation that you're violating. In retrospect, we probably shouldn't have sent the whole report to those companies, but look, you know, we've learned things from it since. Anyway, those billion-dollar companies wrote to us. There was about 6 of us in OG at the time, and they threatened to basically wipe us off the face of the earth. And I was so proud because I was like, yes, we are actually getting to them, right? Like letters from their general counsel, I was like, amazing, we're doing something. Everyone else was terrified. And we did obviously take a step back and regroup and got a defamation lawyer and all this kind of thing. And we're, you know, all fine, got it published, crossed the T's and dotted the I's. But that definitely was, for me, was a moment where it was like, you know, actually this small group of people, if you come together and really put your heads together and think like, what can we do with the existing legislation we have? You can actually like really start to poke the beast in the eye. And that was a really, really nice moment.
Very glad they didn't wipe you off the face of the earth.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I really agree with Aoife that, you know, backlash is actually a sign that we're winning. If we weren't a threat, then there wouldn't be any reason to come for us. So, you know, it can feel frightening and it can feel actually like you're losing. But, you know, unless you're actually a threat to the incumbent interests and then, you know, they don't pay any attention to you. So it's good. It's very good, I think, a very good sign when they're paying attention to you. So if backlash is the metric, we're incredibly successful at the moment, I'd say.
Yes.
But just to, I mean, I think just to maybe reflect on a few moments in my work that have felt at different moments like things to be proud of. I've been involved in a number of quite high-profile court cases that have been successful in the Supreme Courts of countries like the Netherlands and Ireland and South Korea. And all of those were, you know, I'm totally loath to claim credit for any of them. You know, they were huge efforts on the part of movements and incredibly hardworking, talented people putting all manner of resource and time and energy into it. But, you know, I sort of moved away from litigation to some degree because even when you got to the highest court in a country and secured a good outcome, everything about that still felt to me to be very contingent. You know, what a court decides is, in most countries, still vulnerable to what parliaments then legislate for or to what a change in government might do. And, you know, I think we're starting to see some of that political contingency in this country. You know, if you're really talking about social justice and change, like the thing that we have to fight for is durability. And for me, that means building power. And you know, power on the part of ordinary people against those incumbent interests, power that is directed towards building a more just and equal world where people can thrive in, where people feel ownership of that vision and like they have a stake in that vision. That is the only thing that is going to stop the next government or the next parliament or the next judge from undoing whatever progress we've made. And, you know, so much of our agenda on so many fronts is vulnerable right now. And so I feel incredibly lucky to be part of, and, you know, Uplift is dedicated to building a powerful movement in the UK that can rival the status, the networks, the resources of the most powerful industry in the world, which is the oil and gas industry, which has captured our politics in so many ways, that has so much access to decision makers. And the only way that you are going to be able to rival that. I mean, we're never going to be able to build an organisation that has 800 people in their PR department, right? The only way we can rival that is by building the power and supporting the power of ordinary people to call for accountability and to call for justice and to call them out on all of the ways in which they're making our lives worse and enriching themselves at our expense. And so, I would point to the fact that in the last 5 years, the conversation around oil and gas in the UK has changed fundamentally in a way that was unimaginable more than 5 years ago, to the point where, despite, I think, the huge amount of noise around this, and again, I think, this backlash is indicative of the progress and the threat that we've become, we have a government that's committed to ending new exploration licenses for North Sea oil and gas. We have successive governments that have imposed a windfall tax on an industry that's taken billions of pounds off the value of oil and gas companies. That's an industry that, as Mary pointed out, is used to getting some of the most generous subsidies in the world from governments. There are all sorts of ways in which we have collectively constrained the power and social license of the oil and gas industry. And for a country that's the second largest oil and gas producer in Europe, where the state and the industry have had such a close relationship for so long, that is a huge achievement. And that's an achievement that's only possible because of the movement that's been built, really.
Okay.
Well done, Tessa.
We're running out of time, which is a tragedy. When progress feels slow, how do you keep personal resilience?
I mean, this is the cliche, but the OG team is so fabulous. So it's definitely kind of just looking around the office. But I think also, and we've talked a lot about kind of intersectionality here, and I am an absolute raging feminist. And my particular thing that I focus on is paternity leave, because I really, really, really believe that until men also take time off when babies are born, women will never have equal pay. And there's absolutely no reason why. And I would also say a company policy or a country legislation that says men are only entitled to 2 weeks or maybe a month if they're very generous is indistinguishable from a policy that says women must be the primary caregivers. And we would all be out on the streets rioting if that's what the UK legislation said. So I'm kind of surprised we haven't had big human rights cases on that yet. But anyway, one day. And I'm really proud that at OG, from day one, we didn't have any parental leave policy at all. And pretty soon after we started, it was suggested to me by members of staff that we should have some policies on, for example, parental leave and annual leave and things like that. And I was like, okay, I guess we should do that. But as soon as we put them in place, they were equal for men and women. And now we have a full 6 months paid for everyone who has a new child in Opportunity Green. And I think the thing that is really exciting to me is the number of people who come to us and say, can I see your policy? Can we copy it? And it is a real change. I think that parental leave is starting to actually penetrate and have real kind of traction. And not just from people like me that are like, because I want equal pay. It's also the men who are like, I want some time with my kids. So I think that's the thing, is when especially the climate bit is really, really tricky, to also be able to take a step back, look a bit more broadly, and find those clinks of light and really go, okay, great, there's something that I can celebrate.
The founder of CDP, Tessa Tennant, said exactly the same thing.
Great.
Resilience. Michaela, Tessa?
I think I feel like I kind of said part of my resilience thing is that I think about the mycelium and the mushroom. But I also think a huge part of it is actually that it's something that I need to still work with a bit, because I do think I used to have a bit of a struggle complex that many of us can have in the movement, of thinking that we need to be struggling so much and pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. I do really think we do need to push ourselves out of our comfort zone. I think I tend to do it to the self-sacrificial level, which is very unhealthy. But it is also true that throughout history, many people have gone, and presently today, many people have gone and are going through significantly worse conditions than we are, particularly in this country. If I think about, like people that I organise with, like remotely from the Niger Delta, who, you know, are living in one of the most militarised places in the world, and for them to be able to organise, they are the risks and the threats to their life, and also, you know, I mean, their ability to live a full life when their water is literally oil for a lot of these communities. And they are still creating, like, still continuing and still organising in such incredible, like, transformative, like, also very, like, beautiful and really, like, power-shifting ways, I think reminds me that within our conditions, we can and must do so much as well, and we actually have a duty to do that. And that also motivates me in a huge way. It's communities in the Niger Delta, communities like the Yukba community in Colombia as well, who are resisting Glencore, and also a lot of these companies, their headquarters are just down the road from here. And I think we have a responsibility at the, with such proximity to the kind of core of that power, core of that finance, to disrupt it and to challenge it and to make ourselves uncomfortable in the pursuit of that as well. But also, I look throughout history and I look presently, throughout history to, like, my ancestors in Jamaica, who will have been, you know, resisting conditions that I, like, can't even comprehend and imagine. Like, the violence of slavery is just not, like, we do not sit with that enough of how genuinely awful it was. And yet people still, like, resisted and still fought and still sang songs and still lived full lives, and not full lives, sorry, but, like, still were able to try and find, in not just dignity, but resistance in those conditions. And if people could do that then, we can do that now. And I think of presently communities in Palestine in particular, who are resisting in such, like, completely awful conditions, and in many ways can feel abandoned by many people across the world. But I think what's brought me a lot of hope, actually, is how much the climate movement in the last 6 years has actually put a lot of effort in, I think, into changing and being transformed. And that I think the Palestine movement has done that even more for our society as a whole and for our organising movements. And it's brought me so much hope, I think, to see how people have used learnings maybe that they got from 2020 in the Black Lives Matter movement, have applied that to what they're seeing is happening in the genocide in Palestine, and are, like, actively organising their communities in a way that is really transformative. If you look at, like, you know, the campaign against Palantir, they've managed to make Palantir, like, a household name in a really terrible way through grassroots organising. Like, people 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, people didn't know who Palantir was really, and yet they were having a huge amount of power. And it's because of actually a lot of, like, NHS workers who have done a grassroots campaign that has made this, like, a national issue, that Palantir is meant to be having access to our NHS data, and now the NHS are reviewing the contract. That is a huge blow. That could set a precedent as well. Like, there's so much, like, incredible organising that's happened in the face of that, and it's in solidarity, and there's so many people who are resisting in conditions that are so much worse than ours. And where that gives me resilience is I'm reminded that we are not the first to do this. We're not the first to, like, face world ending. People are facing world ending across the world. And many people have succeeded in those in conditions that are worse than ours. And so we can succeed too, and we must, and we have a duty, I think, to take action towards that. And so, yeah, that's what keeps me going.
So hope, Tessa, just a very brief aspect of hope that you'd like the audience to take from here.
Yeah, it's interesting. We get asked about hope all the time if you're a climate activist. And I'm just not that kind of invested in my, like, psychological posture on any given day. I'm pretty motivated in this fight. I think the stakes are quite clear. And some days I'm angry, and some days I'm frustrated, and, you know, some days I'm hopeful. But, like, either way, I'm going to get up and fight every day because the stakes are enormous. And, you know, as Michaela said, and, you know, there's an American academic, Olufemi Taiwo, who says, you know, our ancestors fought so much worse with so much less, you know, and that is enough to keep me going, especially given here we are in a beautiful air-conditioned hall with an open bar serving sangria. I mean, is it really that bad, people? Like, I feel incredibly privileged to do this work. You know, everyone in this room, I would say, has quite a lot of privilege and therefore responsibility, and I feel very lucky to be on the right side of history at a moment when we can still make a difference. And, you know, and I also have, and I cultivate, and I would encourage you all to do the same, but, you know, I have a lot of joy in my life, and I think we should take this work seriously and not take ourselves seriously. And One of my colleagues is in the room, and he can probably attest to how many emojis we use, like on the regular in our communications at Uplift. Like I don't think there's any reason, certainly if you're in the climate movement in the UK, to feel hopeless. You know, we have huge opportunities ahead of us. We have a strategy. I mean, certainly we have a strategy. You know, we just need to get to work, and we have all the tools we need to do that. So, you know, what's there to be hopeless about, I would say.
Salute that. Well, before I give you the last word, if I would say, I can sum this up, I think, by saying, just let them do their worst and we'll do our best. So, Aoife.
Brilliant. Yeah, so I just wanted to say a few thank yous. So first of all, thank you so much to our panel and Paul for moderating and being here tonight. I wanted to give a special shout out to Abby, who basically organized everything. So well done, Abby. I also want to thank my trustees, especially, some of whom are here tonight. They are our cheerleaders who also ask critical questions now and then, but mostly our cheerleaders, without which we couldn't do the things we do. So thank you so much to our trustees. And then finally, the people who are always closest to my OG heart, which is my funders. And they give me hope because they're the people who look at us saying, we're working on the sectors where emissions aren't coming down yet. And no, we're not going to tell you that it's all solved next year. This is in for the fight, and we're going to need a lot to actually do this. But on that theme, we will do our best work and we will win. So thank you so much to our funders, without whom OG wouldn't exist. So thank you. And now it's time for drinks. So there's outside, I don't know if it's gotten any cooler. There's also some inside bits if you do prefer to stay in the cool. But yes, please go mingle. There's going to be canapes. Thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you.